Melissa de Kock from the WWF, who has actually for many, many years been working on the ground in Africa in trying to align some of these challenges. You are a specialist with the WWF exactly on climate and community and nature, balancing these issues. So please, Melissa, welcome to the show and take the floor. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all to our previous speakers for the very useful information. So, as mentioned, I work in Southern and East Africa on nature-based solutions, and I will be speaking a bit about how WWF is engaging with nature-based solutions with a specific focus on this area. I'm just waiting for my slides to load. There we go. I'm working on the assumption that everybody can hear me, so I'm just going to proceed until stopped. Thank you very much. So I think both Stuart and Tim highlighted this particular graphic, but what I really want to say is that increasingly it's becoming very clear that nature underpins human well-being. And this is really it provides us with a lot of opportunities to work on this from that perspective. I'm not going to go into the details of the IUCN definition, which has been touched upon, but what I want to highlight is that for WWF, of course, while ecosystem degradation has been highlighted as the 7th societal challenge that NBS should address, we, of course, will address that as part and parcel of other societal challenges. It won't be the primary societal challenge that we work on, but rather a co-benefit. So some of the opportunities we see. Nature-based solutions present a very good opportunity to address both or all three of the issues around social, climate, and nature benefits synergistically. It provides opportunities for more resilient infrastructure and development pathways. It can be a very cost-effective alternative or complementary with grey infrastructure, particularly around issues such as disaster risk reduction, adaptation, and water. As mentioned already, it provides a very good opportunity to develop a fairer, greener, and smarter post-COVID recovery trajectory. By using nature-based solutions, we have an opportunity to really not only address existing health challenges, but prevent future pandemics. It has both application in rural and urban environments. It provides a very strong opportunity and something that we really want to highlight about supporting the needs and priorities of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And very importantly, it highlights nature's value as well as its potential for human development. So some of the elements of nature-based solutions, based very much on the IUCN definition, we need to contribute intentionally and directly to human well-being, and very importantly, at both a local and a global scale. We want to ensure maximum benefits to biodiversity. So this is about using nature sustainably and sustaining, enhancing, or supporting biodiversity while we're addressing societal challenges. We need to manage for change. Very importantly, if we're using nature to address climate change, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, we also need to be sure that that nature isn't being impacted negatively by climate change. We need to be context specific, needs to be appropriate for both the biodiversity in that area and, as mentioned, for IPLCs. Needs to be inclusive and implemented and designed with the full engagement and consent of Indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as other rights holders. As Stuart touched upon, there's a lot of complementarity with other solutions. We need to measure the impact. We've spoken previously about the need to be cost effective, but we also need to prove that nature-based solutions are an effective solution. As a result, we must measure the impact. We need to have a land and seascape perspective. While many nature-based solutions might be done at a local level, we really need to be thinking at the bigger perspective. And importantly, of course, NBS needs to be informed by science. So the design of nature-based solution interventions need to, as Stuart mentioned, we need to be very clear on what societal challenges we're addressing, and we need to be explicit about that. We then need to identify the targets of the intervention, the so-called beneficiaries. And again, both at the local level, but also at the global level. For us, it's not enough to say that a REDD+ initiative will benefit the world's population through mitigation. We need to be very sure that it also adds value to the people living with that forest. We then need to identify what nature will be used to address that problem. So what is the ecosystem that the nature-based solution is based on, for example, a forest, and what are the ecosystem services that will be used to deliver the benefits? Importantly, how will biodiversity and ecosystems be sustained or improved? And as touched upon, we need to monitor it very carefully to enable adaptive management. So how is WWF addressing nature-based solutions? So this is an evolving strategy. We have a steering group in WWF, we have a working group, and we are planning on developing a strategy. We've done a recent mapping of nature-based interventions in WWF. We've identified 120 or more of them spread around the world. We're doing quite a lot of work on policy and advocacy, trying to integrate nature into various sectoral policies, of course in the 2030 Agenda, the CBD and the UNFCCC. Historically, a lot of our work on nature-based solutions has been framed around climate and freshwater, but there is the recognition that this is much broader. And also we have a bankable nature solutions program at WWF, which is about mobilizing private sector investment. Of course, this isn't identical to nature-based solutions, but there are a lot of overlaps here. So I'm now going to highlight a couple of the interventions that WWF is working on. From a policy perspective, while not a nature-based solution in itself, the policy perspective is very important to create that enabling environment. So we've been doing a lot of advocacy around how nature is very, very important for development, including how to integrate NBS into the revised NDCs. We're also looking at financing interventions. We've done some really great work in Kenya and Uganda around piloting of payment for ecosystem services in watershed management. I'm now going to go to 4 case studies, and I'd like to assure Stuart that I have screened them against the standard and do believe that they are quite robust nature-based solutions, but I welcome your feedback on it. In Kenya, we're working with integrated water and forest management around the Mau Forest and Mara River catchment. The Mau Forest is the headwater for the Mara River, providing water and livelihoods for thousands of people as well as for wildlife. Historically, however, there's been a lot of forest encroachment as well as unsustainable exploitation of the forest. This has resulted in deteriorating water quality as well as disruption of flow regimes to the basin. WWF worked with the government as well as local communities to create a shift to more participatory forest management, which has entailed benefit sharing, rights and access for rural people, restoring of degraded sites, and livelihood diversification in this area. What this has resulted in is increased water security, both for the people living in the river, but very importantly also for the downstream users, diversified livelihoods and improved yields for people, increased community resilience to climate and other environmental shocks, reduced erosion and siltation, flood protection, and climate mitigation. From a biodiversity point of view, this has resulted in a regeneration of the forest and those degraded sites and significantly fewer illegal activities. And very importantly, this has resulted in or enabled continued water flow to the Mara Basin, including the famed Masai Mara Reserve. If the water flow to the Mara River stops flowing to the Masai Mara, the very famous wildebeest migration is unlikely to happen. And there's so much tourism and thousands of jobs and millions of dollars that are dependent on that river. I'd also like to take you now to Namibia, where pre-1990, the local communities suffered from a great deal of disenfranchisement from the apartheid government. There were very few opportunities for income or livelihoods in these rural areas of Namibia. And there was a huge amount of commercial poaching. WWF supported the government and, again, very importantly, the local communities to shift to a community-led sustainable management of wildlife and then later forests and fish. Now, the primary aim of this work was to improve livelihoods and well-being of rural Namibians. As a result of this work, since 1998, there's been increasing flow of funding to these rural people. There's now 86 communities that are established in Namibia benefiting from wildlife management. And last year, they obtained 55 million Danish crowns to them from wildlife-based tourism. What's very important to note, however, is that this is not their only income. This is a complementary strategy to their traditional livelihoods. It's also enabled livelihood diversification, created additional jobs in an area where without wildlife-based tourism, there really aren't any other jobs. That funding is used for community development initiatives, which benefit all the people. There's also a number of socio-cultural benefits, which are incredibly important for people. This is about rights and empowerment and benefits and access. It's also resulted in increased fish catches in the community reserves that have been developed, as well as increased community resilience to climate and other related shocks. From a biodiversity point of view, this has created a vast network of additional wildlife-friendly area which has provided increased connectivity for wildlife to move. It's enabled significantly increased wildlife numbers in the country, as well as contributed to ecosystem resilience. Moving to the marine sector, this is a case study based around the Southwest Indian Ocean region. I think, as everybody recognized, ocean and coastal habitats provide many livelihoods, food security, and climate resilience in this area for millions of people. Traditionally, there's been a history of unsustainable use of these resources, resulting in degraded ecosystems, reducing livelihood opportunities, and there's been a number of climate change impacts for these coastal communities. WWF, again working with the government and communities, has supported the implementation of community-based mangrove and fisheries management programs, resulting in the restoration of mangroves, the protection of coral reefs, the diversifying of livelihoods, as well as conducting climate vulnerability assessments and developing adaptation options. This has resulted in increased food security for the people living in these areas. The fish are returning because of the mangroves, the coral reefs being protected. The crabs and shrimp also now have their habitat, which they can spawn in. Importantly, there's also increased income from new opportunities such as ecotourism, seaweed farming, and octopus sales. Importantly, this is also contributing to the adaptation and resilience of the communities. From a biodiversity point of view, the habitat is being restored, the fish stocks are able to grow, and the octopus are again growing to maturity. And also this has a huge impact for the resilience of the ecosystem. So a couple of reflections that some of which echo what both Stuart and Tim have mentioned. There are differing interpretations of nature-based solutions. And while we have the standard, which is going to play a huge role in assisting people to really identify the nature-based solution that they'd like to implement, it's also important to recognize that, for example, IUCN has an interpretation, different ministries have different interpretations, and the EU themselves has a different interpretation. Nature-based solutions are only one element of a strategy in many circumstances, often intertwined with policy as well as non-nature-based solutions options. As Stuart highlighted, and this is important for WWF, not all conservation is nature-based solutions, but all nature-based solutions should be based upon conservation principles. We find that it's incredibly important to manage the nature in nature-based solutions for change, be that climate change or the natural systems change, also very importantly, human-induced change, and also both over space and over time. It's also important to recognize the trade-offs. There's potential trade-offs between the global good versus the local impact, also the trade-offs potentially between climate versus nature. And lastly, it's very important that we take a long-term perspective on nature-based solutions. Thank you very much.
Let me just ask you one question. There's no doubt that it is you bring a new agenda to decision makers locally in governments, etc. Have you, over the last few years or the recent years, seen a further development in terms of appreciating the opportunities or the need to incorporate nature-based considerations in policy development? Is it being appreciated more?
I'm really sorry, but I'm struggling to hear.
All right. I think then we're just going to have to move on now. I'm sorry, but if we can't make the sound work, I think we should move on to the next speaker. Melissa, I have to thank you very much for your contribution. And then I think you left us with a lot of really good, rich thoughts for the further discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.